Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the worn leather shoes of a medieval castle servant. And trust me, you're about to discover why being born into service meant signing up for a lifetime subscription to misery you never ordered. Picture this. It's 4:30 a.m. in the year 1347, and you're sleeping on a straw mattress that's probably harboring more livestock than a small farm. The castle bells are clanging like someone's beating a metal trash can with a sledgehammer, and you know with that sinking feeling in your stomach that another day of backbreaking labor is about to begin. You probably won't survive to see 30, but hey, at least you'll have job security until then. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little global community of insomniacs and history lovers come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you as consciousness creeps back isn't the cold, though God knows it's freezing, it's the sound. Castle life runs on bells, and they're ringing now with the kind of urgency that suggests someone important is already annoyed. You're sharing this cramped servant's quarters with about 15 other souls, all groaning and shuffling in the pre-dawn darkness. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, damp straw, and something that might generously be called breakfast cooking somewhere far below. Your feet hit the stone floor, and the cold shoots up through your legs like lightning. Medieval castles weren't exactly designed with comfort in mind. They were fortresses first, homes second, and servant accommodations came in a distant third after the wine cellar and the dog kennels. The stones beneath your bare feet have been worn smooth by generations of servants before you, all shuffling to their duties in the same resigned manner you're about to adopt. You're what historians call a household servant, which sounds dignified until you realize it's basically medieval code for human pack mule with opposable thumbs. Your day officially starts when the chapel bell rings for lauds, the first prayer service of the day, but unofficially, it started about an hour ago when the kitchen staff began their preparations. You can hear them already, the clatter of iron pots, the scrape of knives on cutting boards, and the occasional colorful oath that would make a sailor blush. The hierarchy in a medieval castle is more rigid than a frozen corpse, and you're about as far down the ladder as it gets without actually being livestock. Above you are the skilled craftsmen, the blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons who at least have trades that command some respect. Above them are the household officials, the steward who manages the castle's affairs, the chamberlain who handles the lord's personal needs, and the marshal who oversees the stables. At the very top, of course, sits your lord and his family, living in luxury that you'll spend your entire life maintaining but never experiencing. Your specific role depends on what the castle needs and what you're physically capable of doing. Maybe you're assigned to the kitchens, where you'll spend your days turning massive spits over roaring fires until your face is permanently flushed and your arms feel like they're going to fall off. Perhaps you're destined for the stables, where you'll muck out horse stalls and tend to animals that are fed better than you are. Or maybe, and this is where you really hit the servant lottery, you're reassigned to chamber service, which means you get to handle the personal waste of people who consider you slightly more valuable than furniture. The medieval workday doesn't follow our modern 9-to-5 schedule. Oh no, that would be far too civilized. Instead, you work from can see to can't see, basically from dawn until well after dusk, with breaks that are more theoretical than actual. The concept of weekends doesn't exist. Sunday might mean attending church service, but it also means the Lord's family needs their meals prepared and their chambers cleaned just like any other day. Historians still argue whether medieval servants were technically slaves or free laborers, but from where you're standing cold, hungry, and about to spend the next 16 hours doing backbreaking work for people who barely acknowledge your existence, the distinction feels pretty academic. You're tied to this castle by bonds of feudalism that are as binding as any chains. You can't leave without permission. You can't change jobs without approval. And you certainly can't speak up when you're treated poorly. The castle around you is waking up in layers, like some massive stone organism coming to life. First, the servants, your people shuffling about their duties in the pre-dawn darkness. Then the household officials, emerging from their slightly better quarters to supervise and, inevitably, find fault with everything you've already started. Finally, the noble family themselves will grace the world with their presence, expecting everything to be perfect despite having contributed absolutely nothing to making it so. Your clothing situation is about what you'd expect from someone at the bottom of the medieval food chain. You own exactly one set of work clothes, a rough wool tunic that itches constantly, cloth leg wrappings that never seem to stay in place, and leather shoes that are more holes than shoe at this point. In winter, you might have a cloak if you're lucky and the previous owner died of something that wasn't too contagious. Fashion isn't exactly a concern when you're more worried about frostbite than style. The dyes used for your clothing are the cheapest available, usually a muddy brown or gray that hides stains well, which is fortunate because you'll be acquiring plenty of them. Your tunic is made from the coarsest wool available, woven by other servants during the long winter evenings when there's not enough daylight for outdoor work. The fabric is so rough it could probably sand wood, and it will never truly fit properly because it's sized for generic servant rather than your specific body. The sleeves are either too short or too long. The shoulders either pinch or hang loose, and the hem hits at exactly the wrong spot to be comfortable for any kind of movement. The castle itself is a marvel of military engineering and a nightmare of daily living. Those romantic images you might have of medieval castles, all tapestries and roaring fireplace, that's the Lord's quarters. Your world is narrow stone corridors that echo with every footstep, chambers that never quite get warm, and staircases worn smooth by centuries of servants carrying heavy loads up and down, until their knees give out and they're replaced by someone younger and less broken. These corridors are designed for defense, not convenience, which means they're full of sharp turns, narrow passages, and sudden level changes that make carrying anything larger than a dinner plate an exercise in strategic planning. The walls weep moisture constantly, creating patches of green mold that no amount of scrubbing seems to eliminate. The air never quite circulates properly, creating pockets of stale mustiness that cling to everything and everyone. Water is a constant concern, and not just for drinking. Everything in a castle requires water: cooking, cleaning, brewing, washing, and guess who gets to haul it? That's right, you and your fellow servants, bucket by backbreaking bucket, up spiral staircases that seem designed to punish anyone unfortunate enough to be carrying something heavy. The castle well is deep, the buckets are heavy, and the stairs are endless. It's like a medieval gym membership you never wanted and can never cancel. The well water itself is of questionable quality on the best of days. Sometimes it runs clear and tastes only slightly of minerals and whatever mysterious substances have seeped into the ground over the centuries. Other times, it emerges with a distinctly earthy flavor and a color that suggests you might want to strain it through cloth before using it for anything important. During dry spells, the water level drops so low that hauling a single bucket requires what feels like lowering the rope into the earth's core. The smell of a medieval castle is something our modern noses couldn't even begin to process. It's a complex bouquet of wood smoke, cooking food, unwashed bodies, animal waste, rotting rushes on the floor, and underlying it all, the persistent damp mustiness that comes from living in a massive stone structure that never quite dries out. You'll get used to it. You have Tobit visitors from other castles always wrinkle their noses when they first arrive. The rushes on the floor deserve special mention because they're basically medieval carpet. If carpet was made of plant matter that slowly decomposed under your feet. Fresh rushes smell sweet and clean, but those are reserved for the Lord's chambers and special occasions. Your world is paved with rushes that have been walked on, spilled on, and occasionally used as an emergency bathroom by people and animals alike. They're supposed to be changed regularly, but regularly is a flexible concept when you're already working from dawn to dusk. Food, for you, is fuel and nothing more. While your lord and his family dine on elaborate dishes seasoned with expensive spices from distant lands, your meals consist mainly of bread, porridge, and whatever vegetables are currently growing in the castle garden. Meat is a rare luxury, usually appearing in your bowl only when something has gone slightly off and needs to be consumed quickly before it becomes completely inedible. You'll learn to be grateful for these scraps, because hunger is a constant companion that makes even spoiled meat seem like a feast. The bread that forms the backbone of your diet is made from whatever grain is available and affordable, which means it's often a mixture of wheat, barley, oats, and sometimes ground peas or beans to bulk it up. It's dense, dark, and requires serious jaw muscles to chew properly. Fresh bread is a luxury reserved for the noble table. Your bread is usually at least a day old and sometimes several days past its prime. You'll learn to dunk it in whatever liquid is available, watered wine, or even just water to soften it enough to eat without breaking teeth. Your sleeping arrangements would make a modern college dorm room seem palatial. You share space with anywhere from 10 to 20 other servants, depending on the size of the castle and the season. Personal privacy is a concept that simply doesn't exist. Everyone sleeps when everyone else sleeps, wakes when everyone else wakes, and dreams of better lives that will never materialize. The straw mattress you call a bed is shared with a thriving ecosystem of fleas, lice, and other tiny creatures that consider you a mobile buffet. You'll scratch constantly, but scratching too much marks you as someone who can't handle the basic realities of servant life. The straw itself is changed occasionally, but occasionally might mean twice a year if you're lucky. Most of the time, you're sleeping on plant matter that's slowly composting beneath you, generating its own heat through decomposition, which would be nice if it didn't also generate its own distinctive aroma. The seasonal changes affect servants far more dramatically than they do the noble families. In winter, the servants' quarters become ice boxes where your breath fogs in the air and water freezes in the washing basins. You'll huddle together for warmth, sharing body heat and misery in equal measure. Summer brings its own challenges. The same stone walls that can't hold heat in winter can't release it in summer, creating stifling conditions that make every physical task feel like running a marathon. Your tools are whatever you can find, borrow, or occasionally steal. A good knife is treasured like a family heirloom because it might be the only sharp implement you ever get to call your own. Brooms are made from bundled twigs tied to sticks, and they fall apart constantly. Cleaning rags are whatever fabric has become too worn for any other purpose, meaning you're trying to clean surfaces with material that's barely holding together itself. The concept of personal time is laughable. Even when you're not actively working, You're expected to be available for whatever sudden need might arise. A servant's day doesn't end at a specific time. It ends when there's literally nothing left that requires immediate attention. And in a castle full of nobles who've never learned to do anything for themselves, that moment rarely arrives. As you prepare to face another day in the stone prison you call home, remember that millions of people lived and died in circumstances exactly like yours. They woke up to the same bells, felt the same cold stones beneath their feet, and faced the same endless cycle of labor that stretches out before you now. Some found small joys, a kind word from a fellow servant, a moment of warmth by the kitchen fire, the satisfaction of work well done even if no one notices. Others simply endured, day after day, year after year, until their bodies gave out and they were replaced by the next generation of the unfortunate. The bells are getting more insistent now, and you can hear the shuffle of feet in the corridor outside your quarters. Your fellow servants are beginning to move, each one knowing exactly what needs to be done because the routine never changes. In a few minutes, you'll join them, and another day of medieval servitude will officially begin. The sun hasn't even risen yet, but your day is already mapped out in tasks that will leave you exhausted by evening and ready to collapse back onto that straw mattress, only to wake up tomorrow and do it all again. The kitchen is hell with a roof, and you're about to discover why medieval cooks had a life expectancy that made gladiators look like they'd chosen a safe career path. You stumble down the narrow stone steps, following the smoky haze and cacophony of sounds that mark the heart of castle operations. The heat hits you like a physical wall even at this ungodly hour. The massive hearths have been burning for hours, and the temperature in here could melt armor. Your eyes immediately start watering from the smoke, and you haven't even started working yet. The kitchen is a vast stone cavern that looks like it was designed by someone who thought, what if we combined a blacksmith's forge with a torture chamber? Enormous fireplaces dominate entire walls, their mouths wide enough to roast an entire ox, which, inconveniently, is exactly what you might be expected to do for the next feast. Cast iron pots the size of bathtubs hang from chains over the flames, filled with bubbling masses of whatever needs cooking for the day's meals. The smell is an overwhelming mixture of wood smoke, roasting meat, herbs, and something that might charitably be called medieval kitchen ambience, but realistically smells like centuries of spilled grease mixed with desperation. Your first task of the day is to turn the spit, which sounds simple until you realize that medieval people had some seriously warped ideas about what constituted simple. The spit is a massive iron rod suspended over the fire, and hanging from it is whatever unfortunate animal has been selected for today's meal. Could be a pig, could be a side of beef, could be an entire deer that some noble decided looked at him funny during yesterday's hunt. Your job is to turn this heavy, unwieldy contraption at a steady pace to ensure even cooking, which means you'll be standing in front of a roaring fire for the next several hours, manually rotating dead animals like some kind of medieval rotisserie operator. The heat is unbearable. Within minutes, your face feels like you've been standing too close to a dragon, and sweat is pouring down your back despite the frigid castle air just feet away. The fire spits and crackles, sending sparks flying in random directions that you'll learn to dodge with reflexes that would impress a fencing master. Burns are inevitable, small ones from flying sparks, larger ones from accidentally touching hot metal, and occasionally spectacular ones when you lose concentration and lean too close to the flames. But the real danger isn't the fire, it's the other servants. The kitchen operates like a frenzied ballet performed by people who haven't eaten enough and are working with sharp objects. Scullery maids rush past carrying cauldrons of boiling water. Kitchen boys dart between the hearths with armloads of firewood. And the cook himself moves through this chaos like a general commanding troops in the middle of a battle. Everyone knows that one mistake, one moment of inattention, could result in a disaster that ruins an entire meal and brings down the wrath of nobles who consider properly prepared food a divine right. The cook is a massive, red-faced man whose temper runs as hot as his ovens. He's one of the few servants who commands actual respect in the castle hierarchy, mainly because nobles may not know much about running a household, but they definitely know when their food isn't up to their ridiculous standards. This makes him powerful, and he wields that power like a medieval Gordon Ramsay with anger management issues and access to very large knives. Cross him, mess up an order, or heaven forbid, ruin something expensive, and you'll discover that kitchen tools make excellent weapons in the wrong hands. Historians still argue whether medieval castle kitchens were more dangerous than actual battlefields, but from where you're standing dodging flying grease while turning a spit over an open flame, the distinction seems academic. The injury rate among kitchen staff was astronomical, and not just from obvious hazards like fire and knives. The constant heat and humidity created perfect conditions for infections, cuts that wouldn't heal properly, and respiratory problems from inhaling smoke all day long. The ingredients you're working with would make a modern health inspector weep with despair. That meat you're rotating? It's been hanging in the castle's pantry for who knows how long, developing a patina that suggests it's either perfectly aged or well on its way to becoming a science experiment. Medieval people had some interesting theories about food preservation, most of which boiled down to cover it in salt and hope for the best. The salt helps, but it doesn't work miracles, and you'll quickly learn to identify the subtle differences between meat that's merely gamey and meat that might actually fight back. Spices are the holy grail of medieval cooking, worth more than gold and guarded accordingly. A single peppercorn is precious enough that servants have been flogged for spilling them, and the exotic seasonings that make noble food palatable are kept under lock and key like military secrets. You'll never taste most of these spices, theory reserved for people whose palates are apparently too refined for the simple pleasure of food that doesn't actively hurt to eat. Instead, you get to smell them as they're added to dishes you'll never consume, a constant reminder of the culinary paradise that exists just beyond your reach. The vegetables available depend entirely on the season and what's managed to survive in the castle garden. In spring, you might get fresh herbs and early greens that actually taste like something other than disappointment. Summer brings a variety of produce that almost makes the kitchen work bearable: fresh bread, ripe fruits, vegetables that haven't been stored in damp cellars for months. But winter is a special kind of culinary hell, where your ingredient options consist mainly of root vegetables that have been in storage so long they're more memory than substance, and preserved meats that require serious creativity to make edible. The bread ovens are massive stone structures that require careful management and the kind of timing that would challenge a Swiss watchmaker. The fire has to be just right, too hot, and the bread burns on the outside while staying raw inside. Too cool and you get dense, inedible loaves that could be used as building materials. You'll learn to judge the temperature by holding your hand inside the oven and counting how long you can stand the heat, a technique that sounds primitive until you realize it actually works better than any medieval thermometer. Water management in the kitchen is a logistics nightmare that would break a modern supply chain expert. Everything requires water: cooking, cleaning, drinking, and it all has to be hauled up from the well in buckets that grow heavier with each trip. The water for cooking needs to be clean. The water for cleaning can be slightly less pristine. and the water for scrubbing floors can basically be whatever's left over. You'll develop an intimate understanding of water conservation that would impress modern environmentalists, mainly because wasting water means making extra trips to the well when you're already exhausted. The dishes you're preparing are elaborate affairs that serve multiple purposes beyond mere nutrition. A noble feast is a display of wealth, power, and status, which means every dish needs to be not just edible, but impressive. This results in culinary creations that prioritize appearance over practicality: roasted peacocks reassembled with their feathers, elaborate sugar sculptures that take days to create, and meat dishes shaped into fantastical creatures that require more artistry than cooking skill. But here's the cruel irony. You're creating these magnificent meals that you'll never taste, while you're sweating over roasting spits and stirring massive pots of sauce. Your own meals consist of whatever scraps are left over after the nobles have had their fill. Sometimes there are genuine leftovers: pieces of meat, bits of bread, vegetables that are still mostly edible. Other times, you're looking at the kind of remnants that make you question whether hunger might actually be preferable. The kitchen hierarchy is as rigid as anywhere else in the castle, but with the added element of scalding liquids and sharp objects to make disagreements more interesting. At the top is the master cook, followed by specialized staff like the sauce cook, the pastry cook, and the person responsible for the elaborate sugar work that nobles seem to consider essential for proper dining. Below them are the general kitchen servants. That's you, who do whatever needs doing and hope it doesn't involve handling anything too sharp, too hot, or too likely to explode. Accidents are frequent and spectacular. Boiling water spills, oil catches fire, knives slip, and heavy pots fall with enough force to break bones. The kitchen maintains a selection of burn remedies that range from moderately effective to completely useless, most involving various animal fats and herbs that may or may not have any actual healing properties. You'll collect scars like souvenirs, each one telling the story of a lesson learned the hard way in medieval culinary arts. The timing of meal preparation is crucial and unforgiving. Noble families expect their food served at specific times, prepared to exact specifications, and presented with the kind of ceremony that suggests eating is a religious experience. This means everything in the kitchen operates on a schedule that allows for no delays, no mistakes, and certainly no consideration for the physical limits of the people doing the actual work. Miss a timing, and the entire meal service falls apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. Food storage is a constant battle against decay, pests, and the basic laws of physics. The castle's pantries and storage rooms are designed to keep food as fresh as possible using medieval technology, which basically means keeping things cool, dry, and away from the rats. The rats, however, didn't get the memo about staying away, and they've developed sophisticated techniques for accessing even the most carefully protected supplies. You'll wage daily war against rodents that seem to have evolved specifically to defeat medieval food storage methods. The serving of meals is its own elaborate ritual that transforms kitchen servants into temporary actors in the theater of noble dining. You'll carry massive platters through the castle corridors, trying not to trip on the uneven floors or spill anything that might result in punishment ranging from verbal abuse to actual physical violence. The great hall fills with nobles who've worked up an appetite through the strenuous activity of existing in luxury, and they expect their food delivered with the kind of precision that would challenge a military operation. As you finally finish your rotation on the spit, your arms aching, your face red as a sunset, your clothes soaked with sweat and smoke, you realize this is just the beginning. The day's meals are far from complete, and there are still hours of cooking, serving, and cleaning ahead. The kitchen never truly sleeps, and neither, it seems, do the people who keep it running. Tomorrow you'll be back here before dawn, ready to do it all again, because medieval nobles have this inconvenient habit of wanting to eat every single day, regardless of how much work that creates for people like you. Welcome to the most glamorous aspect of medieval castle life, waste management. And by waste management, I mean you're about to become intimately familiar with every bodily function of every person living above you in the feudal hierarchy. If you thought the kitchen was bad, wait until you discover that medieval sanitation makes a modern porta potty seem like a luxury spa experience. You're now the proud keeper of chamber pots, garderobes, and all the delightful surprises that come with managing human waste in an era when indoor plumbing was still a fever dream. Your day begins with the chamber pot rounds, which is exactly as appealing as it sounds. Each noble bedroom contains at least one chamber pot, a ceramic or metal bowl that serves as a personal toilet for people too important to walk to the garderobe in the middle of the night. Your job is to collect these vessels of human dignity and empty them into the castle's waste disposal system, which is a polite way of saying you dump everything into a pit and hope it eventually goes away. The smell hits you before you even enter the first bedchamber. Medieval people had some interesting theories about hygiene, most of which involved avoiding water whenever possible and masking body odor with various herbs and perfumes that only made the overall aroma more complex and horrifying. The chamber pot itself adds another aromatic layer to this bouquet, creating a sensory experience that would challenge the strongest stomach. Chamber pots come in various sizes and styles, depending on the wealth and pretensions of their users. The lord's family might have elaborate painted pottery versions that are almost artistic in their decoration because apparently even waste receptacles need to reflect social status. Lesser nobles make do with simpler clay versions, while you and your fellow servants share communal facilities that make privacy a forgotten luxury. The most ornate chamber pots feature intricate glazing and decorative motifs that would be beautiful if they weren't designed to hold human excrement. Some wealthy families even have their coats of arms painted on their waste vessels, which seems like a questionable decision from a branding perspective. The weight of a full chamber pot is surprising and deeply unpleasant. These things aren't designed for easy carrying theory wide, awkward, and filled with liquid that sloshes in ways that defy physics and threaten disaster with every step. You'll develop a special walking technique that minimizes spillage while maximizing speed, because lingering with a chamber pot full of noble waste is nobody's idea of a good time. The handles, if they exist at all, are positioned with the assumption that whoever's carrying them has arms like an orangutan and the balance of a tightrope walker. But chamber pots are just the beginning of your waste management responsibilities. The real adventure lies in maintaining the castle's garderobes, medieval toilets that represent humanity's early attempts at sophisticated waste disposal. Garderobes are essentially stone seats built into the castle walls with holes that drop waste directly into the moat, a cesspit, or sometimes just the ground outside the castle walls. It's a system that works on the principle that if you can't see the waste, it's not your problem anymore. The garderobe itself is usually located in a small stone chamber that's about as private as a phone booth and twice as aromatic. The seat is carved stone, which means it's always cold and never comfortable. Medieval people believed that the ammonia from urine would help preserve clothing, so these chambers often doubled as storage areas for expensive garments. Nothing says luxury like storing your finest robes next to a hole that leads directly to a pile of human waste. The irony is that the ammonia theory actually had some merit. It did help repel moths and other insects that would damage fabric, but the trade-off was clothing that permanently reeked of urine. Maintaining these facilities requires skills they don't teach in any modern trade school. You need to ensure the chutes aren't blocked, which sometimes means climbing down into spaces that would make a sewer worker reconsider their career choices. Blockages are frequent and catastrophic, creating backups that turn the entire system into a medieval sewage disaster that affects everyone in the castle. The chutes are narrow, dark, and slippery, and descending into them requires a special kind of courage that borders on insanity. The architecture of garderobe chutes is surprisingly sophisticated, designed to create a natural ventilation system that helps manage odors. They're angled to prevent waste from sticking to the walls and often include bends and curves that help control the flow. Unfortunately, these same design features that make the system work also make it incredibly difficult to clean when things go wrong. You'll find yourself contorting into positions that would impress a yoga instructor, all while working in conditions that would violate every safety regulation ever conceived. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the connection between poor sanitation and disease, but from your position as chief waste manager, the relationship seems pretty obvious. Castles with better waste disposal have fewer instances of the mysterious stomach ailments that regularly sweep through medieval households. Unfortunately, understanding the problem and having the resources to fix it are two very different things. The Black Death taught everyone about the importance of sanitation, but implementing solutions required engineering knowledge and financial resources that most castles simply didn't possess. The castle cesspit is a marvel of medieval engineering and a nightmare for anyone responsible for maintaining it. It's essentially a massive hole lined with stone where all the castle's waste eventually ends up. The pit needs regular cleaning, which involves someone, usually you, climbing down into this aromatic dungeon with buckets and shovels to remove the accumulated waste. The contents get spread on the castle's agricultural fields as fertilizer, completing a circle of life that's more disgusting than inspiring. The cesspit construction itself tells a story of medieval priorities and engineering limitations. The walls are lined with stone to prevent collapse and contamination of groundwater, showing that medieval builders understood at least some principles of sanitary engineering. However, the waterproofing techniques were primitive at best, meaning that waste often seeped into the surrounding soil and eventually into water sources used by the castle population. Working in the cesspit requires protective clothing that doesn't actually exist yet. You'll wrap rags around your face, tuck your clothing into your shoes, and pray that nothing splashes too enthusiastically. The smell is indescribable. Imagine the worst bathroom you've ever encountered. Multiply it by 100, and add the special aging process that comes from months of fermentation in a stone pit. The gases that build up in these enclosed spaces are not only nauseating but potentially dangerous, creating an environment where passing out could be fatal. The waste itself tells stories about the lives of the people above you. Noble waste contains remnants of exotic foods, expensive spices, and the kinds of dietary excess that come with unlimited resources and limited self-control. Servant waste, on the other hand, reveals the harsh reality of subsistence living, mostly grain, vegetables, and whatever scraps manage to trickle down from the noble table. Sometimes you can identify specific meals based on undigested remains, creating an unwanted intimate knowledge of everyone's dining habits. Medieval people had some creative theories about human waste and its properties. Some believed that urine had medicinal qualities, which led to the disturbing practice of drinking aged urine to cure various ailments. Others thought that waste could be used to predict the future or diagnose diseases. You'll encounter all sorts of folk remedies and superstitions that involve human excrement in ways that would horrify modern medical professionals. Physicians would examine waste samples to diagnose illnesses, believing that color, consistency, and odor provided crucial health information. The collection and storage of urine for various purposes was a common practice that added another dimension to waste management duties. Urine was used in textile processing, leather tanning, and even as a cleaning agent due to its ammonia content. This meant maintaining separate collection systems and storage vessels for liquid waste, creating additional work and more opportunities for aromatic disasters. The seasonal variations in waste management add their own special challenges. Winter brings frozen waste that requires chipping and scraping to remove from surfaces. The cesspit develops a layer of ice that needs to be broken before new waste can be added, creating a job that combines waste management with demolition work. Summer heat accelerates decomposition, creating smells that can be detected from impressive distances and attracting flies in numbers that suggest divine punishment. Spring thaws create flooding that can overflow waste systems, spreading contamination throughout the castle grounds. Privacy is a foreign concept when it comes to medieval waste management. Garderobes are often built in rows, creating communal toilet experiences that foster a different kind of social bonding. Conversations happen, business is conducted, and social hierarchies are maintained even in these most private moments. You'll learn more about castle politics from garderobe gossip than from any formal briefing. The communal nature of these facilities means that digestive problems become public knowledge, creating social dynamics around bowel movements that would horrify modern sensibilities. The waste from the castle's kitchens presents its own unique challenges. Food scraps, grease, and cooking waste all need disposal, and the medieval approach is basically throw it somewhere and hope it decomposes before it becomes a serious problem. Kitchen waste attracts vermin, creates slippery surfaces, and adds aromatic complexity to an already challenging olfactory environment. Grease disposal is particularly problematic because it doesn't decompose easily and creates blockages in drainage systems that require manual removal. Animal waste is another delightful addition to your responsibilities. Horses, dogs, chickens, and various other creatures all contribute to the castle's waste stream. And guess who gets to manage their contributions? Horse manure is actually valuable as fertilizer and fuel, so it gets collected and stored with something approaching care. Dog waste is just disgusting and needs to be removed before someone important steps in it and blames the nearest servant. The sheer volume of animal waste in a medieval castle is staggering. Horses alone can produce 50 pounds of manure per day, and a typical castle might house dozens of horses. The castle's drainage system is a primitive network of channels and gutters designed to move liquid waste away from living areas. These channels need constant cleaning and maintenance because they clog with waste, debris, and the occasional dead animal that wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. You'll spend hours crawling through narrow stone channels, clearing blockages and trying not to think too hard about what you're crawling through. The drainage channels are carved directly into the castle's stone foundation, creating permanent waterways that can't be easily modified or improved. Personal hygiene products are basically non-existent, which means you're dealing with waste management without the benefit of modern cleaning supplies. Soap is a luxury item that most servants never see, so cleaning yourself after a day of waste management involves cold water, rough sand, and whatever herbs are supposed to have cleaning properties. The result is that you never feel truly clean, just varying degrees of less dirty. Some servants resort to using wood ash as a cleaning agent, which provides some alkaline cleaning power but also creates its own skin irritation problems. The social implications of waste management create their own hierarchy of misery. Some servants are assigned to manage only the noble family's waste, which is considered a privilege because it's presumably higher quality excrement. Others handle the general population's contributions, which involves dealing with whatever dietary disasters the servant population has managed to create. The worst assignment is managing the waste from sick individuals, which combines disease risk with enhanced aromatic properties. Waste-related accidents are frequent and memorable. Slipping on wet stone while carrying chamber pots creates disasters that affect everyone in the immediate area. Clothing falls into cesspits. Tools are dropped into unspeakable places. And occasionally someone falls into a waste pit and requires rescue by colleagues who are already questioning their life choices. The narrow corridors and steep staircases of medieval castles make carrying waste containers an exercise in advanced logistics and prayer. The disposal of female-specific waste products adds another layer of complexity to medieval waste management. Without modern hygiene products, women rely on cloth rags that need washing and reuse, creating additional laundry responsibilities that combine waste management with textile maintenance. These items require special handling and cleaning procedures that test the limits of medieval laundering techniques. The cloth rags need to be boiled, scrubbed, and dried in ways that ensure they're both clean and reusable, creating additional work for servants who are already overwhelmed. Medical waste presents its own unique challenges in an era when surgical procedures are performed with tools that would horrify modern doctors. Bloodied bandages, amputated limbs, and other medical refuse all need disposal, often in the same systems used for regular waste. The lack of understanding about disease transmission means that infectious materials are handled with the same casual approach used for regular waste, creating health hazards that compound the already dangerous working conditions. Remember that chamber pot round you started this morning? Well, the day's waste management duties are far from over. Evening brings another round of collections, more cesspit maintenance, and the ongoing battle against the forces of decomposition and gravity that threaten to overwhelm the castle's primitive sanitation systems. As you finish your rounds, emptying the last chamber pot and checking the final garderobe, you realize that civilization is a very thin veneer over humanity's baser functions. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do this all again, because waste production is one human activity that never takes a day off. The nobles above you will continue producing waste with the same enthusiasm they bring to consuming resources, and you'll continue managing the results with the resignation that comes from understanding your place in the medieval hierarchy of human dignity. If you thought dealing with human waste was the pinnacle of medieval servant misery, wait until you experience laundry dye, a weekly ordeal that combines backbreaking physical labor with chemical warfare against your own skin. Welcome to the world of medieval washing, where clean clothes come at the cost of destroyed hands, aching backs, and the kind of exhaustion that makes chamber pot duty seem like a relaxing hobby. You're about to discover why medieval people preferred to smell bad rather than subject themselves to the torture of frequent washing. The laundry process begins at dawn with what can only be described as a logistical nightmare. Every piece of fabric in the castle clothing, bedding, table linens, tapestries needs regular washing, and regular in medieval terms means whenever the smell becomes unbearable or the fabric can literally stand up by itself. Your first task is collecting all this textile treasure from throughout the castle, which means climbing countless stairs while carrying bundles of dirty cloth that weigh more than most people and smell like a combination of body odor, food stains, and mystery substances you'd rather not identify. The sheer volume of laundry in a medieval castle would overwhelm a modern commercial operation. Noble families change clothes frequently not because they understand hygiene, but because clean clothing is a status symbol that demonstrates wealth and the ownership of enough servants to maintain it. A single lord might own dozens of tunics, robes, and undergarments, each requiring individual attention and care. The castle's bedding alone represents a textile mountain that defies rational management sheets. Blankets, pillows, and bed curtains that collect months of human occupation and need regular cleaning to prevent them from becoming biological hazards. Water for washing must be heated in massive cauldrons over open fires, creating a steam-filled environment that turns the laundry area into a medieval sauna from hell. These cauldrons are enormous iron vessels that require multiple servants to move when empty and become immovable objects when filled with hot water. The fire needed to heat this much water requires constant attention and massive amounts of fuel, making laundry day an expensive operation that consumes resources like a small military campaign. The heating process alone takes hours and requires careful management to prevent the water from boiling away or the cauldrons from cracking under thermal stress. You'll spend the early morning hours feeding fires and monitoring water temperature, developing an intimate understanding of heat management that would qualify you as a medieval engineer if such positions existed for people of your social status. The steam rising from the cauldrons creates a hot, humid environment that makes breathing difficult and turns every surface slippery with condensation. Medieval soap is a luxury item that costs more than most servants earn in a month, which means you're working with substitutes that range from moderately effective to completely useless. Wood ash mixed with animal fat creates a primitive soap that works through the magic of chemistry and the sacrifice of your skin. The lye produced by soaking ash in water is caustic enough to dissolve organic matter, including the organic matter that makes up your hands. You'll develop chemical burns that never quite heal, permanent staining on your fingers, and skin that feels like leather left out in the sun. The ash used for soap making comes from specific types of wood, and not all ash is created equal. Beech and oak produce the best lye, while pine and other resinous woods create products that are more likely to damage fabric than clean it. Collecting and preparing the right ash requires knowledge that's passed down through generations of servants, creating an informal educational system based on chemical burns and trial and error experimentation. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the relationship between lye concentration and fabric damage, but from your position with hands that are permanently stained and burning, the relationship seems crystal clear. Too little lye and the clothes don't get clean. Too much and you dissolve the fabric along with the dirt. Finding the right balance requires experience, intuition, and a willingness to sacrifice your own skin in pursuit of clean linens. The actual washing process is a full-body workout that would challenge a modern athlete. Medieval washing involves beating, wringing, scrubbing, and agitating fabric in ways that test the limits of both human endurance and textile integrity. You'll use wooden paddles to beat dirt out of cloth, creating a rhythmic pounding that echoes through the castle and can be heard from impressive distances. The motion is repetitive and brutal, creating muscle fatigue that starts in your arms and spreads throughout your entire body. Scrubbing boards made from rough wood or stone provide abrasive surfaces for removing stubborn stains, but they also remove skin from your knuckles with alarming efficiency. You'll develop permanent scars from scraping your hands against these surfaces while trying to work soap into fabric that seems determined to retain every molecule of dirt it's ever encountered. The combination of caustic soap and abrasive surfaces creates wounds that heal slowly and imperfectly, leaving your hands looking like they've been used as weapons in a medieval battle. Stain removal is an art form that requires creativity, persistence, and access to substances that would horrify modern health inspectors. Blood stains require soaking in cold water mixed with salt, creating solutions that turn pink and smell like rusty metal. Grease stains need treatment with hot sand or clay that absorbs oil while simultaneously grinding your knuckles against rough surfaces. Wine stains require white wine for treatment, which seems wasteful until you realize that bad wine is cheaper than replacing expensive fabric. The most challenging stains come from sources you'd rather not think about too deeply. Medieval people had interesting ideas about personal hygiene and bodily functions, creating stains that combine multiple biological substances in ways that challenge both chemical knowledge and human dignity. Some stains require multiple treatments with different substances, creating washing processes that extend over several days and test the limits of both fabric durability and servant patience. Wringing out wet fabric by hand is a special form of torture that medieval people apparently considered normal household maintenance. Heavy, water-soaked cloth weighs exponentially more than dry fabric and fights back like a living creature when you try to squeeze water from it. You'll twist and compress fabric until your hands cramp and your arms shake, extracting water one painful handful at a time while the weight of wet cloth threatens to pull you off balance. The medieval manglia primitive pressing device that uses weight and leverage to squeeze water from fabric represents advanced technology that most castles can't afford. Instead, you're stuck with manual wringing that leaves your hands permanently curved into claw-like shapes and creates joint pain that never completely disappears. The repetitive motion of twisting heavy, wet fabric creates cumulative injuries that accumulate over years of laundry service. Drying laundry presents its own logistical challenges in a climate where sunshine is more suggestion than reality. Wet clothing and linens must be hung in areas that provide maximum air circulation while protecting fabric from rain, snow, and the various flying creatures that consider clean laundry an ideal bathroom facility. The castle's courtyards and gardens become temporary textile forests where sheets and tunics hang like medieval prayer flags, slowly surrendering their moisture to whatever breeze can penetrate the castle's stone walls. Winter drying is a special form of medieval purgatory where wet fabric freezes solid before it can dry, creating laundry that stands upright like fabric sculptures and requires thawing before it can be considered clean. You'll bring frozen clothing indoors to finish drying near fires, creating steamy, humid conditions that make every room feel like a tropical rainforest populated by ghosts wearing damp clothing. The folding and storage of clean laundry requires skills that modern people take for granted. Medieval fabric is expensive and delicate, requiring careful handling to prevent damage that would result in punishment ranging from verbal abuse to physical violence. Each piece must be folded in specific ways that prevent creasing, stored in locations that protect against moisture and pests, and organized according to hierarchies that reflect social status and usage patterns. Fabric care extends beyond simple washing to include repairs and maintenance that keep clothing functional despite the harsh conditions of medieval life. You'll spend countless hours mending tears, replacing worn areas, and reinforcing stress points that threaten to destroy expensive garments. Needlework becomes a survival skill as essential as fire starting or water carrying, because damaged clothing means disappointed nobles and punishments that make laundry day seem pleasant by comparison. The seasonal variations in laundry work create their own rhythms of misery and challenge. Spring brings the massive task of washing winter bedding that's accumulated months of human occupation, creating textile disasters that require multiple wash cycles and heroic amounts of soap. Summer heat makes the washing area unbearable while accelerating the drying process, creating scheduling challenges that require precision timing and heat tolerance that borders on superhuman. Remember that kitchen nightmare you experienced earlier? Well, grease stains from cooking accidents require special treatment that combines the worst aspects of both laundry and kitchen work. You'll scrub fabric that's saturated with animal fat while dealing with caustic soap that's designed to dissolve organic matter, creating a chemical battle that your hands are destined to lose. Laundry accidents are frequent and spectacular, ranging from scalding burns when hot water splashes to chemical injuries from mishandled lye solutions. Clothing gets torn beyond repair, expensive fabric gets permanently stained, and occasionally someone falls into a vat of hot wash water, creating medical emergencies that test the limits of medieval first aid knowledge. The combination of hot water, caustic chemicals, and physical exhaustion creates working conditions that would violate every safety regulation ever conceived. The social hierarchy of laundry work reflects the broader castle power structure in ways that are both predictable and frustrating. The finest garments receive careful individual attention from the most skilled servants, while everyday clothing gets mass treatment that prioritizes efficiency over quality. Your position in the laundry hierarchy determines whether you're trusted with delicate silks or relegated to scrubbing rough wool tunics that fight back like angry animals. Personal clothing maintenance becomes a luxury you can rarely afford for yourself. While you spend days ensuring that noble garments are spotless and perfectly maintained, your own clothing receives minimal attention and accumulates stains, tears, and general deterioration that mark you as clearly as any social badge. The irony of maintaining beautiful clothing while wearing rags is not lost on anyone, but commenting on it would be a career-limiting decision that could result in punishment or dismissal. The end of laundry day brings exhaustion that penetrates to your bones, hands that are raw and burning from chemical exposure, and the knowledge that you'll be doing this all again next week. Your back aches from bending over washing tubs, your arms shake from wringing out heavy fabric, and your skin bears the chemical burns that mark you as a professional laundry worker in an era when such professions come with permanent physical damage. As you hang the last sheet to dry and clean the washing area for tomorrow's cooking preparations, you realize that cleanliness in medieval times is a luxury purchased with the health and comfort of people like you. The nobles above you will dress in spotless garments without giving a thought to the chemical burns and physical exhaustion that made their comfort possible, because the cost of cleanliness is paid by people whose suffering doesn't register in their consciousness. The great hall fills with the kind of tension that makes your stomach clench and your hands shake before you've even entered the room. Tonight is feast night, which means you're about to perform in the most dangerous theater in the medieval world, serving food and drink to nobles who consider elaborate dining a blood sport where servants are the expendable entertainment. Welcome to the ultimate test of medieval service, where one spilled goblet, one moment of clumsiness, or one perceived slight can transform you from invisible help into the evening's primary target for aristocratic rage. The transformation of the Great Hall for a feast is like watching a medieval stage production come to life, except you're not an actoriary part of the scenery that's expected to move, serve, and disappear without ever disrupting the carefully choreographed display of wealth and power. Massive wooden tables are arranged according to social hierarchies that are more complex than modern corporate org charts, with seating positions that reflect not just current status but also recent political developments, family alliances, and feudal obligations that date back generations. The high table sits on a raised platform where your lord and his most important guests will hold court like medieval celebrities, looking down on lesser nobles who occupy tables arranged in descending order of importance. The lowest table might host knights, wealthy merchants, or visiting dignitaries who rate inclusion but not proximity to real power. Your job is to navigate this social minefield while carrying heavy trays, hot food, and containers full of liquid that cost more than your annual wages. Table preparation alone requires skills that would challenge a modern event planner. Each place setting must reflect the guest's social status: golden goblets for the highest nobility, silver for important guests, pewter for those who rate basic respect, and wooden cups for anyone unfortunate enough to be seated near the bottom of the medieval social ladder. The placement of each item follows rules that are both arbitrary and absolute, because aristocrats have strong opinions about fork placement even when most of them still eat with their hands. The serving hierarchy creates its own complex web of responsibility and blame. Senior servants oversee the overall operation while junior servants you handle the actual carrying, pouring, and serving that puts you in direct contact with nobles who've been drinking since midday and consider servant baiting an acceptable form of entertainment. The head butler manages wine service with the gravity of a military operation, because expensive wine in the wrong goblet or served at the wrong temperature can trigger aristocratic tantrums that affect everyone within shouting distance. Your serving outfit is the finest clothing you'll ever wear, which isn't saying much but represents a significant upgrade from your usual rags. Clean tunic, relatively intact leg wrappings, and shoes that don't actively leak you dressed for success by medieval servant standards. The irony is that you'll be serving people wearing clothing that costs more than most villages while dressed in garments that would embarrass a scarecrow, creating visual contrasts that reinforce social hierarchies with every step you take. The kitchen coordination required for feast service would challenge a modern restaurant manager. Multiple courses must arrive at precise intervals, each dish perfectly prepared and presented according to specifications that treat food as art and servants as brushes. You'll form human chains that move platters from kitchen to hall, passing dishes hand to hand in sequences that require timing, coordination, and the kind of teamwork that develops when failure means collective punishment. Carrying a loaded serving tray through the Great Hall is like navigating an obstacle course designed by someone who actively wants you to fail. The floors are uneven stone that catches feet and trips the unwary. The lighting is provided by flickering candles that create shadows and blind spots, and the narrow spaces between tables require maneuvering skills that would challenge a professional dancer. Add the weight of heavy platters, the heat of fresh-cooked food, and the pressure of knowing that dropping anything will result in immediate and painful consequences, and you have a recipe for disaster that somehow needs to be executed flawlessly. The serving vessels themselves are works of art that happen to contain food, each one worth more than you'll earn in your lifetime and irreplaceable if damaged. Silver platters reflect candlelight like mirrors while weighing enough to strain your arms after a few minutes of carrying. Elaborate serving utensils made from precious metals require careful handling to prevent scratches, dents, or other damage that would result in punishment severe enough to serve as entertainment for the assembled nobility. Wine service is a performance art that combines chemistry, psychology, and the kind of precision that would impress a surgeon. Each type of wine has its own goblet, its own serving temperature, and its own presentation ritual that must be executed flawlessly while nobles watch for any excuse to demonstrate their superiority through servant humiliation. You'll learn to judge wine by color, aroma, and the facial expressions of people who consider themselves experts on everything they've never actually done themselves. The actual pouring of wine requires steady hands, perfect timing, and the ability to judge exactly how much alcohol a noble has already consumed without appearing to monitor their drinking. Too little wine and they complain about poor service. Too much and they blame you for their eventual behavior. The goblets themselves are designed to challenge anyone trying to pour into them. Narrow openings, decorative rims, and shapes that seem specifically designed to cause spillage during the pouring process. Historians still argue whether medieval feasts were primarily about food or social display, but from your position serving both, the distinction seems academic. Every aspect of the meal serves multiple purposes: demonstrating wealth, reinforcing social hierarchies, conducting business, arranging marriages, and providing entertainment that often involves watching servants struggle with impossible tasks while intoxicated nobles offer helpful commentary. The entertainment between courses creates additional serving challenges as musicians, jesters, and performers fill the hall with distractions that make navigation even more treacherous. You'll weave between lute players and acrobats while carrying hot food, dodge trained animals that are part of the evening's amusement, and serve wine to nobles who are more interested in the entertainment than in acknowledging your existence until something goes wrong and you become the entertainment. Spills are inevitable and spectacular, creating disasters that spread across expensive clothing, valuable tablecloths, and the kind of social situations that require immediate damage control. Wine spills on noble garments create stains that cost more to repair than most people earn in a year, while food spills on important documents can destroy business deals, marriage negotiations, or political alliances that took months to arrange. The cleanup of spills must be immediate and invisible, requiring you to materialize with cleaning supplies, remove all evidence of the accident, and disappear again without disrupting the flow of conversation or entertainment. You'll develop reflexes that would impress a professional athlete, diving under tables to clean floors, reaching around important people to clean surfaces, and performing damage control that requires both speed and invisibility. Noble behavior during feasts ranges from merely demanding to actively dangerous, with alcohol consumption creating unpredictable situations that test your survival instincts along with your serving skills. Drunk nobles consider servants fair game for entertainment that includes verbal abuse, physical violence, and creative punishments that demonstrate their power while amusing their equally intoxicated friends. You'll learn to read facial expressions, voice tones, and body language that signal approaching trouble, developing early warning systems that might give you enough time to avoid becoming the evening's victim. The political undercurrents of feast conversations create additional hazards for servants who overhear information that could be valuable, dangerous, or both. Noble families conduct business during meals, discussing everything from military campaigns to marriage arrangements while servants move invisibly around them. The wrong reaction to overheard information: a gasp, a smile, a change in expression can mark you as a security risk that needs to be eliminated permanently. Food presentation is theater that requires servants to become invisible actors in elaborate productions. Dishes must arrive at precisely the right moment, be presented with the appropriate ceremony, and disappear again without disrupting the flow of conversation or entertainment. The carving of roasted meats becomes a performance that demonstrates both the skill of the carver and the wealth of the host. While you stand ready to catch drippings, provide clean utensils, and remove bones without being noticed, remember that chamber pot duty that seemed so degrading? Well, feast service makes cleaning human waste look dignified by comparison, because at least excrement doesn't actively mock you while you're cleaning it up. Nobles consider servant humiliation a legitimate form of entertainment, creating situations where your suffering becomes part of the evening's amusement for people who find cruelty more interesting than wine. The removal of finished courses requires the same precision as delivery, but with the added challenge of navigating around increasingly intoxicated guests who might grab servants, knock over goblets, or create scenes that turn routine service into obstacle courses. Dirty dishes must be collected without disrupting ongoing conversations, cleared from tables where important people are conducting business, and removed from areas where entertainment is taking place, all while maintaining the invisibility that good service requires. Kitchen communication during feast service relies on hand signals, whispered messages, and a complex system of codes that allow servants to coordinate activities without disturbing the nobles they're serving. Emergency signals warn of approaching disasters, while status updates help coordinate the timing of multiple courses that must arrive in perfect sequence despite the chaos of large-scale food service. The end of the feast brings cleanup challenges that transform the Great Hall into a battlefield littered with the debris of aristocratic excess. Spilled wine stains expensive fabrics. Food remnants create sticky messes on valuable surfaces, and broken pottery represents financial losses that will be deducted from servant wages regardless of who caused the damage. You'll spend hours cleaning up after people who created messes with the casual indifference that comes from never having to clean anything themselves. Personal interactions with nobles during feast service range from being completely ignored to becoming the target of attention that's never welcome. The best-case scenario is invisibility, completing your duties without anyone noticing your existence. The worst case involves becoming entertainment through punishment, humiliation, or violence that amuses intoxicated aristocrats who consider servant suffering a legitimate form of recreation. The exhaustion that follows feast service combines physical fatigue with emotional drainage that comes from hours of maintaining perfect behavior while being treated as less than human. Your feet ache from standing and walking on stone floors, your arms burn from carrying heavy trays, and your nerves are frayed from the constant tension of navigating social situations where every mistake could result in serious consequences. As you finally finish cleaning the Great Hall and return the serving vessels to their proper storage, you realize that feast service represents medieval class warfare disguised as entertainment. The nobles have demonstrated their superiority through elaborate consumption while you've provided the labor that made their display possible, creating a social theater where wealth is performed through the suffering of people whose existence only matters when something goes wrong. Tomorrow the Great Hall will return to its normal state, and the nobles will return to their usual routines of expecting perfection from people they consider barely human. But tonight's feast will be remembered and discussed, analyzed for its political significance and social implications, while the servants who made it possible will be forgotten until the next time their labor is required to maintain the illusion of aristocratic superiority. The changing seasons turn your already miserable existence into a rotating schedule of different types of suffering, each with its own unique challenges that test the limits of human endurance in ways that would make modern survival experts weep. Winter doesn't just arrive in medieval castles, it invades like a conquering army, bringing cold that penetrates stone walls, food shortages that turn meals into mathematical equations, and heating challenges that require you to choose between hypothermia and carbon monoxide poisoning. Welcome to seasonal survival, where nature itself seems determined to kill you while nobles complain about minor inconveniences from their heated chambers. Winter transforms the castle into a massive stone refrigerator where your breath fogs constantly and water freezes in basins overnight, creating morning routines that begin with chipping ice out of washing vessels. The stone walls that provide protection from enemies also conduct cold with the efficiency of medieval air conditioning, creating internal temperatures that fluctuate between uncomfortably cold and potentially fatal. Your sleeping quarters become ice boxes where multiple people huddle together for warmth that's never quite adequate, sharing body heat and misery in equal measure. The firewood situation becomes a matter of life and death that requires constant attention and backbreaking labor. Every piece of wood burned in the castle's numerous fireplaces must be cut, split, dried, and carried by servants who are already working from dawn to dusk on other tasks. You'll spend precious daylight hours in forests that are dark, dangerous, and filled with wild animals that consider frozen servants a convenient winter meal. The axes are dull. The wood is often green and reluctant to burn, and the quantities required to heat even essential areas of the castle are staggering. Cutting firewood in medieval winter conditions is like working in a frozen hell where every swing of the axe sends shock waves through arms that are already numb with cold. The wood fights back green timber that refuses to split cleanly, frozen logs that shatter into useless fragments, and trees that seem determined to fall in directions that maximize danger and inconvenience. Your hands will crack and bleed from gripping rough wooden handles in sub-freezing temperatures, creating wounds that heal slowly and poorly in the harsh winter environment. The transportation of firewood from forest to castle requires multiple trips carrying loads that would challenge a draft horse, all while navigating paths that are icy, uneven, and occasionally blocked by fallen trees or snow drifts that appear overnight. The wood itself seems to gain weight during transport, and the bundles that felt manageable in the forest become crushing burdens by the time you reach the castle gates. Your back will develop permanent damage from hauling wood, and your shoulders will ache with a deep, persistent pain that never quite goes away. Heating the castle requires strategic decisions about which areas receive precious fuel and which are allowed to remain frigid until absolutely necessary. The noble quarters receive priority heating, obviously, while servant areas are heated only when the alternative is having your workforce freeze to death and become unable to work. The kitchen fires burn constantly because food preparation can't stop for weather, but the rest of the castle becomes a patchwork of warm zones surrounded by Arctic wastelands where your breath fogs and your fingers go numb within minutes. Food storage in winter becomes a complex balancing act between preservation and access, with failure meaning starvation for everyone in the castle. The root cellars that seemed adequate in autumn become critical life support systems where every potato, turnip, and preserved meat represents the difference between survival and catastrophe. You'll spend hours in underground storage areas that are dark, damp, and filled with the sounds of small creatures that are also trying to survive the winter by eating your food supplies. The preservation techniques used for winter food storage would horrify modern health inspectors but represent the cutting edge of medieval food science. Meat is salted, smoked, and dried until it resembles leather more than food, requiring hours of soaking and cooking to become edible again. Vegetables are stored in combinations of sand, straw, and root cellars that maintain temperatures just above freezing while protecting against frost damage that would destroy entire winter food supplies. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood nutrition science, but from your position managing winter food stores, the relationship between diet and health becomes grimly apparent. The lack of fresh fruits and vegetables during winter months creates nutritional deficiencies that manifest as scurvy, night blindness, and general weakness that makes every task more difficult. The preserved foods that sustain life during winter lack the vitamins and minerals that maintain health, creating a slow decline that affects everyone in the castle. The rationing of food during lean winter months requires mathematical skills that most servants don't possess and decision-making authority that they're never given. You'll count every grain, measure every portion, and watch noble families consume in one meal what servant families need for a week, all while calculating whether the remaining supplies will last until spring. The constant hunger that accompanies winter rationing creates a gnawing emptiness that affects concentration, strength, and the ability to perform the physical labor that winter survival requires. Water management in winter presents challenges that would stump modern engineers and requires solutions that test the limits of medieval technology. Wells freeze, pipes burst, and the water sources that seemed reliable in warmer months become inaccessible ice formations that require dangerous excavation work. You'll break ice on water barrels every morning, sometimes finding that the entire contents have frozen solid overnight, creating water shortages that affect everything from cooking to basic hygiene. The daily water collection becomes an expedition that requires proper planning and equipment that doesn't exist yet. Hauling water in sub-freezing temperatures means dealing with buckets that become heavier as ice forms around their edges, handles that freeze to your hands, and stairs that become treacherous ice rinks where one slip could send you and your precious water cargo tumbling down stone steps that are unforgiving to both flesh and pottery. Spring arrives like a medieval miracle worker, melting snow and ice while creating new challenges that test your flood management skills. The sudden thaw turns the castle grounds into muddy swamps where every step sinks into standing water that's often contaminated with months of accumulated waste. The drainage systems that seemed adequate during dry weather become overwhelmed by snowmelt, creating flooding that reaches into storage areas and living quarters where water damage destroys supplies and creates conditions perfect for disease. The spring cleaning that follows winter confinement is a massive undertaking that makes regular cleaning look like light dusting. Months of heating with smoky fires have left every surface covered with soot and grime that requires serious scrubbing to remove. The rushes on floors have been compressed into unrecognizable mats that harbor everything from food scraps to small animals, all of which needs removal and replacement with fresh materials that must be gathered, prepared, and installed. Summer heat creates its own special form of medieval hell, where the stone walls that couldn't hold warmth in winter become heat traps that turn the castle into a massive oven. The kitchen work that was merely dangerous in winter becomes potentially lethal in summer, as the combination of external heat and cooking fires creates temperatures that would violate every workplace safety regulation ever conceived. You'll work in conditions that make the surface of the sun seem like a reasonable vacation destination. The preservation of food during summer heat requires constant vigilance and techniques that battle against time, temperature, and bacteria that medieval people don't understand but definitely experience. Meat spoils within hours if not properly preserved. Milk sours faster than it can be consumed, and bread develops mold that requires careful inspection to determine what's safe to eat and what might kill you. The summer kitchen becomes a battlefield where servants fight a losing war against decomposition using weapons like salt, smoke, and prayers that are only occasionally effective. Water management in summer reverses the winter problem instead of too much ice. You're dealing with too little water as wells dry up and water sources become contaminated by heat and stagnation. The water that remains often tastes of minerals, algae, and mysterious substances that make every drink an adventure in medieval chemistry. You'll ration water during summer droughts while continuing to perform all the tasks that require water, creating impossible mathematical problems that somehow need practical solutions. Remember that laundry day torture you endured earlier? Well, summer heat makes those caustic soap solutions even more damaging to skin that's already suffering from heat rash, dehydration, and the general breakdown that comes from working in temperatures that would challenge professional athletes. The combination of heat, humidity, and chemical exposure creates working conditions that are genuinely dangerous to human health. The seasonal cycles create their own rhythms of anticipation and dread as you prepare for each new set of challenges that nature will throw at your already overwhelmed existence. Autumn brings the frantic activity of harvest and preservation, where the work of winter survival begins with gathering, processing, and storing everything that will keep the castle population alive during the cold months. The pressure to complete these tasks before winter weather makes them impossible creates a work schedule that pushes human endurance beyond reasonable limits. The harvest season transforms every available servant into agricultural workers who must complete months of work in weeks before weather destroys crops that represent the difference between winter survival and starvation. You'll work in fields from dawn to dusk, gathering grain, vegetables, and fruits that must be processed immediately to prevent spoilage. The race against time and weather creates an atmosphere of controlled panic where every day of good weather is precious and every storm threatens disaster. Food processing for winter storage requires skills that combine chemistry, engineering, and pure desperation to create preserved foods that will remain edible for months. You'll salt meat until your hands are raw from handling coarse salt, smoke fish until your eyes stream from constant exposure to wood smoke, and dry vegetables using techniques that haven't changed since your great-grandmother's time. The quantities involved are staggering enough food to feed dozens of people for months, all processed by hand using tools that were primitive when they were invented. The social dynamics of seasonal survival create additional stress, as winter confinement forces people into close quarters where personal conflicts become magnified by cold, hunger, and the general misery that comes from surviving in conditions that test human limits. Arguments that would be minor annoyances in summer become serious problems when they involve people who must share heating fuel, food supplies, and living space for months without escape. Disease spreads more rapidly during winter confinement when people are crowded together in poorly ventilated spaces where fresh air is sacrificed for warmth. The respiratory infections that seem minor in warmer weather become serious threats when combined with poor nutrition, cold stress, and the general weakness that comes from months of survival-level living. You'll watch fellow servants develop coughs that never go away, wounds that heal slowly, and the general decline that marks people who are slowly losing the battle against seasonal survival. The psychological effects of seasonal cycles create their own challenges as the constant struggle for survival wears down mental resilience along with physical strength. The depression that accompanies long winter months combines with malnutrition, cold stress, and the general hopelessness that comes from knowing that this cycle will repeat every year for the rest of your short life. The brief respite of spring and summer provides just enough relief to make the return of winter seem even more cruel and inevitable. As you prepare for another seasonal cycle of survival challenges, you realize that medieval life is essentially a yearly contest between human endurance and natural forces that seem designed to eliminate anyone not born into sufficient wealth to hire other people to handle the actual work of staying alive. The nobles above you will complain about minor seasonal inconveniences while you struggle with life and death challenges that they never see and wouldn't survive if they had to face them personally. Disease in a medieval castle spreads like gossip through servant quarters fast, inevitably, and with consequences that range from unpleasant to absolutely fatal. Welcome to an era when medical knowledge consists mainly of wishful thinking, prayer, and treatments that are often more dangerous than the diseases they're supposed to cure. You're about to discover why medieval people had a life expectancy that would make modern insurance companies weep, and why the phrase, "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger," was probably invented by someone who'd never experienced medieval medicine. The first sign of illness in the castle is usually a servant collapsing during their duties, Because working while sick isn't optional, it's expected until you're literally unconscious or dead. The medieval approach to employee healthcare is essentially work until you drop. Then we'll find someone else to do your job. You'll learn to recognize the early signs of various diseases not through formal medical training, but through the grim experience of watching fellow servants progress through different stages of illness while continuing to perform backbreaking labor. The castle's medical facilities consist of whatever herbs the cook happens to know about, a collection of folk remedies that may or may not have any basis in reality, and occasionally a visiting physician whose medical knowledge is based on theories that were wrong when they were first proposed centuries ago. The castle's infirmary is usually just a corner of the servants' quarters where sick people are isolated from the general population, which in practice means they're left to recover or die without medical attention while their duties are redistributed among the remaining healthy servants. Medieval medicine operates on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, which supposedly need to be balanced for good health. This leads to treatments that involve deliberately removing blood from people who are already weakened by disease, creating medical interventions that accelerate death rather than preventing it. You'll watch fellow servants subjected to bloodletting that leaves them pale and weak, purging that dehydrates them dangerously, and other treatments that seem designed by someone who confused healing with torture. The physician, when he occasionally graces the castle with his presence, arrives with an air of authority that's inversely proportional to his actual medical knowledge. He carries mysterious instruments in a leather bag, wears robes that supposedly signify learning, and speaks in Latin phrases that sound impressive until you realize they're basically medieval medical nonsense wrapped in classical language. His diagnostic techniques involve examining urine colors, checking pulse rates against astrological charts, and making pronouncements about humoral imbalances that require treatments more dangerous than the diseases. The medical tools available would horrify modern doctors and make medieval torture devices look sophisticated by comparison. Lancets for bloodletting are often dirty, dull, and shared among multiple patients without any understanding of disease transmission. Surgical instruments are primitive metal implements that are heated in fires for sterilization, when anyone remembers to sterilize them at all. The concept of antiseptics doesn't exist, which means that even minor medical procedures often result in infections that are worse than the original problems. Bloodletting procedures are performed with the casual confidence of people who believe they're practicing advanced medicine while actually hastening death. The physician selects veins based on astrological calculations and humoral theories, then makes incisions that often become infected due to unsterile conditions. The amount of blood removed is determined by medieval medical texts that were written by people who had no understanding of circulation, blood volume, or the basic physiology that makes bloodletting a terrible idea for sick people. The collection and examination of patient urine becomes a cornerstone of medieval diagnosis, with physicians studying color, clarity, and odor to determine internal conditions through methods that have no scientific basis. Urine is examined in special glass vessels called metulas, and the physician makes confident pronouncements about kidney function, liver health, and general wellness based on visual inspection of liquid waste. The accuracy of these diagnoses is roughly equivalent to reading tea leaves, but they're delivered with the authority of people who believe they're practicing sophisticated medicine. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians understood anatomy, but from your position watching their treatments, their knowledge seems primarily theoretical and frequently wrong. The human body is treated like a machine that can be fixed by removing fluids, adding strange substances, or applying heat and cold in combinations that follow ancient traditions rather than actual medical science. The gap between medical theory and practical results is so vast that recovery from illness seems to happen despite medical treatment rather than because of it. The plague is the ultimate medieval medical nightmare, a disease that kills quickly, spreads rapidly, and challenges every assumption about divine justice and human survival. When plague reaches the castle, it moves through the population like fire through dry straw, killing servants and nobles with the kind of democratic efficiency that temporarily suspends social hierarchies. You'll watch healthy people develop symptoms and die within days, creating mass casualties that overwhelm the castle's ability to dispose of bodies or maintain basic operations. Plague symptoms are horrifying and unmistakable fever that makes people delirious, swollen lymph nodes that create lumps the size of eggs, and skin discoloration that marks victims for death while they're still alive. The speed of plague progression means that people who seem healthy in the morning are dead by evening, creating an atmosphere of terror that makes every cough, every fever, every unusual symptom a potential death sentence. The bubonic swellings, called buboes, appear in the groin, armpits, and neck, growing rapidly and becoming so painful that victims scream when touched. The medieval response to plague combines religious panic with medical interventions that make the disease worse rather than better. Bloodletting is prescribed for fever, creating additional weakness in people who are already fighting for their lives. Strange poultices made from herbs, animal parts, and mysterious substances are applied to plague buboes, often causing additional infections that accelerate death. The medical establishment's response to plague demonstrates the complete inadequacy of medieval medicine when confronted with serious disease. Plague prevention measures reveal the medieval understanding of disease transmission, which is essentially non-existent. People carry aromatic herbs believing that bad smells cause disease, wear amulets that supposedly provide supernatural protection, and avoid contact with victims while continuing to use contaminated water sources and live in unsanitary conditions that actually spread the disease. The disconnect between cause and effect in medieval medicine means that prevention efforts often accelerate transmission rather than slowing it. The disposal of plague victims becomes a logistical nightmare that overwhelms castle resources and creates additional health hazards. Bodies must be removed quickly to prevent further contamination, but the sheer number of deaths often exceeds the castle's ability to dig graves or construct funeral pyres. Mass burial sites are created outside castle walls, creating permanent contamination of local water sources and agricultural areas that affect survivors for generations. Everyday injuries become potential death sentences in an environment where wound care consists mainly of hope and prayer. A simple cut from kitchen work can develop into fatal infection when treated with dirty bandages and herbal remedies that introduce additional bacteria into open wounds. Burns from cooking fires are treated with animal fat and cloth that trap bacteria against damaged skin, creating ideal conditions for infections that spread rapidly through injured tissue. The medieval understanding of infection is virtually non-existent, which means that wound care often involves practices that guarantee contamination. Dirty hands touch open wounds, unclean cloths are used for bandaging, and the same tools are used on multiple patients without any attempt at cleaning between uses. The result is that even minor injuries often progress to serious infections that require amputation or result in death from blood poisoning. Amputation procedures, when they become necessary, are performed without anesthesia using tools that are more suited to carpentry than surgery. The patient is held down by multiple people while the surgeon saws through bone and flesh, creating trauma that often kills people even when the surgery is technically successful. The medieval approach to pain management during surgery consists mainly of getting patients drunk and hoping they pass out before the procedure becomes unbearable. Respiratory diseases thrive in the close quarters of castle living, where poor ventilation and crowded conditions create ideal environments for airborne pathogens. The combination of wood smoke from cooking fires, limited fresh air circulation, and people living in close proximity means that coughs and colds spread rapidly through the servant population. What starts as minor respiratory irritation often progresses to serious lung infections that can be fatal in people who are already weakened by poor nutrition and physical exhaustion. The medieval approach to respiratory illness involves treatments that often make breathing problems worse rather than better. Steam treatments using boiling water and mysterious herbs create inhalation therapies that may help or may introduce additional irritants into already inflamed lungs. Chest poultices made from various animal and plant materials are applied to the outside of the body in the hope that they'll somehow affect internal lung function through magical processes that no one understands. Tuberculosis, known as consumption, is a chronic killer that slowly destroys lungs while creating symptoms that medieval medicine completely misunderstands. The persistent cough, weight loss, and eventual blood spitting that characterize tuberculosis are treated with remedies that range from useless to harmful. Patients are often given rich foods they can't digest, subjected to bloodletting that weakens them further, and isolated in ways that don't prevent transmission but do ensure they die alone and neglected. Digestive problems are constant companions in an era when food safety consists mainly of hoping that questionable meat won't kill you immediately. The preserved foods that sustain castle populations through winter are often contaminated with bacteria that cause severe intestinal distress, creating widespread stomach problems that weaken people just when they need strength to survive harsh conditions. Food poisoning from spoiled meat, contaminated water, and improperly preserved foods create cycles of illness that affect productivity and survival. Medieval treatments for digestive illness range from useless to actively harmful, involving purging treatments that dehydrate sick people and herbal remedies that may be toxic rather than therapeutic. The medieval understanding of nutrition is so primitive that treatments often involve withholding food from people who are already malnourished, creating additional weakness that prolongs illness and increases mortality rates. Emetic treatments designed to induce vomiting are prescribed for stomach problems, creating additional fluid loss in people who are already dehydrated. The water supply in medieval castles is a constant source of disease transmission, with contaminated wells, polluted streams, and storage systems that harbor bacteria and parasites. Waterborne diseases like dysentery and cholera spread rapidly through populations that share water sources, creating epidemic conditions that can devastate entire castle communities. The medieval approach to water treatment consists mainly of adding wine or ale to make contaminated water more palatable while doing nothing to eliminate pathogens. Dental problems become serious health issues in an era without dental care, proper nutrition, or understanding of oral hygiene. Tooth decay progresses to serious infections that can spread to other parts of the body, creating life-threatening conditions that start with simple cavities. Dental pain becomes a constant companion that affects the ability to eat, sleep, and work, while dental infections create abscesses that can cause death through blood poisoning. The medieval approach to dental problems involves extraction using tools that are more suited to metalworking than medicine, performed without anesthesia by people whose medical training consists mainly of apprenticeship to other people who don't understand what they're doing. Tooth extraction often results in additional infections, broken jaw bones, and complications that make the original dental problems seem minor by comparison. The extraction tools are essentially pliers and hammers, used with techniques that prioritize speed over precision or patient comfort. Dental abscesses, when they develop, are treated with hot irons applied directly to infected tissue, creating burns that often become infected themselves. The medieval theory is that heat will draw out infection, but the reality is that thermal trauma adds additional damage to already compromised tissue. Patients who survive dental extraction and subsequent treatment often develop facial deformities from scarring and bone damage that mark them permanently. Remember that waste management duty that seemed so degrading? Well, the diseases that spread through poor sanitation make handling human waste seem like a minor occupational hazard compared to the life-threatening infections that result from medieval approaches to public health. The lack of understanding about disease transmission means that contaminated water, improperly disposed waste, and unsanitary living conditions create breeding grounds for diseases that kill more people than wars. Skin conditions thrive in the medieval environment where personal hygiene is limited by lack of soap, hot water, and understanding of cleanliness. Lice infestations are universal among servants, creating constant itching and skin damage that provides entry points for bacterial infections. Scabies, ringworm, and other skin parasites spread rapidly through shared living quarters and clothing, creating chronic conditions that affect health and comfort while marking victims as diseased and socially unacceptable. The medieval treatments for skin conditions often involve applications of substances that make problems worse rather than better. Animal urine, various plant extracts, and mineral compounds are applied to infected skin in combinations that may introduce additional pathogens rather than eliminating existing ones. The lack of understanding about skin care means that treatments often cause chemical burns, allergic reactions, and secondary infections that are worse than the original conditions. Ergotism, caused by contaminated grain, creates symptoms that medieval people attribute to supernatural causes rather than dietary poisoning. The hallucinations, convulsions, and gangrenous limbs caused by ergot alkaloids are treated with religious rituals and herbal remedies that do nothing to address the underlying contamination. Victims of ergotism are often considered possessed or cursed, leading to treatments that involve exorcism and physical punishment rather than medical intervention. Mental health issues are completely misunderstood in medieval society, where depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions are attributed to supernatural causes rather than medical problems. People suffering from mental illness are often subjected to religious treatments that involve exorcism, physical punishment, and isolation that worsens their conditions rather than providing help. The stress of medieval servant life creates psychological problems that are never acknowledged or treated, leading to additional suffering that affects both mental and physical health. The seasonal variations in disease patterns create their own cycles of illness and death that follow the calendar with grim predictability. Winter confinement creates conditions perfect for respiratory diseases, while summer heat accelerates the spoilage of food and the spread of digestive illnesses. Spring flooding contaminates water sources and creates breeding grounds for diseases that spread through insect vectors, while autumn harvest work creates injuries and exhaustion that increase susceptibility to infection. Women's health issues are particularly poorly understood and badly treated in medieval society, where female anatomy is considered a mystery that's best left to folk remedies and religious intervention. Childbirth is a leading cause of death among women, with mortality rates that reflect the complete inadequacy of medieval obstetric care. Pregnancy and childbirth are treated as natural processes that don't require medical intervention, leading to complications that could be prevented with basic medical knowledge. Midwifery practices, while sometimes helpful, are based on tradition and superstition rather than medical understanding. Midwives use techniques passed down through generations of women, some of which are beneficial and others which are actively harmful. The lack of understanding about infection means that birth procedures often introduce bacteria that cause puerperal fever, killing mothers days after successful deliveries. The castle's approach to epidemic disease involves isolation measures that are often too little and too late, quarantine procedures that don't understand disease transmission, and religious responses that may actually accelerate the spread of infection. When disease strikes the castle population, the response is usually panic followed by ineffective measures that demonstrate the complete inadequacy of medieval public health knowledge. Herbal remedies represent the most advanced medical treatments available, but their effectiveness depends on accurate identification of plants, proper preparation methods, and understanding of dosages that medieval people rarely possess. Many herbal treatments are beneficial, but others are toxic or interact dangerously with each other. The medieval approach to herbal medicine often involves using whatever plants are available rather than specific remedies for particular conditions. As you watch another fellow servant succumb to an illness that could be easily treated with modern medicine, you realize that medieval life is essentially a constant battle against diseases that are winning more often than not. The medical knowledge that might save lives is centuries in the future, while the diseases that kill people are immediate and deadly. Your survival depends not on medical care, but on luck, genetics, and the hope that whatever kills your fellow servants will somehow pass you by until your body finally gives out from the accumulated damage of medieval living. Welcome to the medieval class system, where social mobility is about as likely as finding a unicorn in the stable and twice as dangerous to pursue. You've been born into servitude like your parents before you, and their parents before them, creating a family tradition of misery that stretches back through generations of people who never had a choice in their circumstances. The feudal system isn't just an economic arrangement, it's a social prison where the bars are made of tradition, law, and the very real threat of violence against anyone foolish enough to challenge their assigned place in the cosmic order of medieval hierarchy. Your legal status as a serf ties you to the land more securely than any chain, creating a form of ownership that's technically different from slavery but practically indistinguishable from it. You belong to the manor, the land, and by extension, to the lord who controls both. This isn't just a job you can quit or a contract you can renegotiate. It's a permanent condition that affects every aspect of your existence, from where you can live to whom you can marry to whether your children will have any hope of a better life than the one you're trapped in. The law itself is stacked against you with the kind of systematic bias that would make modern civil rights lawyers weep with frustration. Legal proceedings involving serfs and nobles aren't trials in any meaningful sense of theatrical performances where the outcome is predetermined by social status, and the proceedings serve mainly to provide a veneer of justice to what is essentially institutionalized oppression. When a noble accuses a serf of wrongdoing, the question isn't whether the accusation is true, but rather how severe the punishment will be. Court proceedings, when they involve servants, are exercises in medieval theater where everyone knows their role and the script never varies. You have no right to legal representation, no presumption of innocence, and no realistic hope of a fair hearing when your word is pitted against that of someone born into the noble class. The judge is either your lord himself or someone appointed by him, creating a judicial system where conflicts of interest aren't just accepted theory, the entire foundation of medieval justice. The punishments available to lords for dealing with disobedient serfs range from economic penalties that create permanent debt to physical violence that serves as entertainment for noble audiences. Fines can be imposed for virtually any behavior that displeases your lord, from working too slowly to speaking disrespectfully to accidentally damaging property while performing the dangerous tasks you're forced to do. These fines accumulate into debts that can never be repaid, creating financial chains that bind you even more securely to your servile condition. Physical punishment is both common and creatively brutal, designed not just to inflict pain but to provide object lessons for other serfs who might be considering disobedience. Public beatings serve dual purposes, punishing the immediate offender while entertaining nobles who find servant suffering amusing. The medieval approach to discipline treats human beings as property that needs occasional correction, with violence applied in measured doses to maintain control without destroying valuable assets. Historians still argue whether medieval serfs understood their legal rights, but from your position at the bottom of the social hierarchy, the concept of rights seems purely theoretical. You have obligations endless, overwhelming obligations, but rights are luxuries reserved for people born into higher social classes. The gap between legal theory and lived reality is so vast that discussions of serf rights sound like fairy tales told by people who've never experienced the daily humiliation of medieval servitude. Marriage, for serfs, requires permission from your lord and often involves financial payments that treat human relationships like business transactions. You can't marry someone from another manor without complex negotiations between lords who treat the arrangement like a trade deal involving livestock. Your choice of spouse is subject to approval by someone who considers your personal happiness irrelevant to his economic interests, creating romantic relationships that must navigate feudal politics as well as personal attraction. The children born to serf marriages automatically inherit their parents' servile status, creating a hereditary caste system that ensures future generations of cheap labor for noble families. Your children will be born into the same servitude you've experienced, with no hope of advancement through education, marriage, or personal achievement. The medieval social system is designed to be self-perpetuating, creating permanent classes of people whose circumstances are determined by birth rather than ability or effort. Education for serfs is essentially non-existent, because literacy and learning are considered dangerous tools that might give people ideas about improving their circumstances. The knowledge that might allow social mobility is carefully guarded by the noble and clerical classes, who understand that ignorance is essential for maintaining social control. You'll remain illiterate not through lack of intelligence, but through systematic denial of educational opportunities that might threaten the social order. The economic arrangements of feudalism create relationships that are fundamentally exploitative, designed to extract maximum labor value while providing minimum compensation for the people doing the actual work. You owe your lord not just labor, but specific types of work performed at times that serve his convenience rather than your needs. During harvest season, you'll work his fields before your own, ensuring that his crops are gathered while yours may rot if weather turns bad. Feudal obligations extend beyond simple labor to include military service, where serfs are expected to fight and die for lords who treat them as expendable resources in political conflicts they don't understand and didn't choose. When your lord decides to pursue some territorial dispute or support some political alliance, you become cannon fodder in wars that serve noble ambitions while offering you nothing but the chance to die violently in foreign places for causes that don't benefit you. The taxation system extracts wealth from people who have none, creating financial burdens that ensure permanent poverty for serf families. You'll pay taxes on your land, your livestock, your agricultural production, and even your existence itself through various fees and obligations that transfer wealth upward through the social hierarchy. The medieval economy is designed to concentrate resources in the hands of people who already have everything while keeping working people in permanent destitution. Religious obligations add another layer of control to the feudal system, with the church providing spiritual justification for social arrangements that serve the wealthy at the expense of everyone else. You're taught that your servile condition is part of God's plan, that suffering in this life will be rewarded in the next, and that questioning social hierarchy is tantamount to questioning divine will. Religion becomes a tool of social control that makes resistance seem not just futile but sinful. The Church's role in maintaining feudal hierarchy goes beyond simple spiritual guidance to include active participation in the economic exploitation of serf populations. You'll pay tithes to the Church while receiving religious instruction that emphasizes obedience, acceptance, and the virtue of suffering through circumstances that benefit everyone except you. The spiritual comfort offered by religion comes with a price tag that you can't afford and social expectations that reinforce your subordinate position. Social interactions between serfs and nobles are governed by elaborate protocols that reinforce hierarchy through every gesture, word, and moment of contact. You'll learn to bow at precisely the right angle, speak only when spoken to, and maintain the kind of submissive demeanor that reassures nobles of their superiority while reminding you of your place. These social rituals aren't just customs theory daily performances of subordination that psychologically reinforce the social system. The language used to describe serfs reveals attitudes that treat human beings as property with slightly more legal protection than livestock. Terms like bondsman and villain carry implications of ownership that reflect the reality of feudal relationships while providing enough legal fiction to distinguish serfdom from outright slavery. The vocabulary of feudalism creates categories of humanity that justify treating some people as fundamentally different from and inferior to others. Economic mobility within the serf class exists only in theory, with practical barriers that make advancement virtually impossible for people born into servitude. The skills that might lead to better positions literacy, trade knowledge, political connections are controlled by the same noble classes who benefit from keeping you in your current position. Any attempt to acquire these skills or improve your circumstances is likely to be seen as threatening to the social order and suppressed accordingly. Remember that chamber pot duty you found so degrading? Well, that represents the pinnacle of career advancement available to most serfs moving from general labor to slightly more specialized forms of humiliation that still involve serving people who consider you barely human. The medieval approach to professional development for servants involves learning new ways to be useful to people who will never see you as anything more than animate tools. The geographical restrictions placed on serfs create another form of imprisonment that limits opportunities for escape or advancement. You can't travel without permission, can't seek work in other locations, and can't explore opportunities that might exist beyond the boundaries of your lord's domain. The medieval world is vast and full of possibilities, but all of them are legally and practically beyond your reach. Legal appeals and grievance procedures for serfs are theoretical concepts that exist mainly to provide the illusion of justice while ensuring that real power remains concentrated in noble hands. You can theoretically appeal unfair treatment, but the appeal goes to the same lord who imposed the original punishment, creating a system where justice means whatever serves noble interests. The medieval legal system provides elaborate procedures for maintaining the appearance of fairness while guaranteeing outcomes that favor the wealthy and powerful. The psychological effects of permanent servitude create their own forms of damage that go beyond physical hardship to include the kind of mental conditioning that makes people accept circumstances they should resist. You'll internalize beliefs about your own inferiority, develop learned helplessness that makes resistance seem impossible, and pass these psychological chains to your children along with their legal bonds. The medieval social system doesn't just control bodies, it shapes minds in ways that make servitude seem natural and inevitable. Social surveillance within the serf community creates additional pressures that make collective resistance difficult and individual advancement dangerous. Fellow serfs may report suspicious behavior to curry favor with overseers, creating an atmosphere of mistrust that prevents the kind of solidarity that might challenge feudal authority. The divide-and-conquer tactics used to maintain social control turn potential allies against each other while keeping everyone focused on immediate survival rather than long-term change. The contrast between noble leisure and serf labor creates daily reminders of social inequality that are impossible to ignore or rationalize. You'll watch people who've never worked a day in their lives enjoy luxury purchased with your efforts while you struggle to meet basic survival needs despite working from dawn to dusk. The medieval social system makes inequality visible and permanent, creating psychological stress that compounds the physical hardships of servant life. Cultural traditions and social customs reinforce feudal hierarchy through celebrations, ceremonies, and shared activities that emphasize social divisions while providing approved outlets for social tensions. Festival days may offer temporary respite from work, but they also include rituals that celebrate the social order and provide opportunities for nobles to demonstrate their superiority through displays of wealth and power that serfs are expected to appreciate and applaud. The inheritance laws governing serf property ensure that any wealth accumulated through years of sacrifice and saving will be subject to noble claims that prevent the accumulation of resources that might lead to social mobility. Your lord has rights to portions of any inheritance you might leave your children, creating additional obstacles to economic advancement while ensuring that wealth continues to flow upward through the social hierarchy. As you contemplate your future in this rigid social system, you realize that medieval feudalism isn't just an economic arrangement, it's a comprehensive system of human control that affects every aspect of existence from birth to death. The prison you're trapped in has no walls because it doesn't need them. The bonds of law, custom, economics, and psychology are stronger than any physical restraints and more permanent than any architectural structure. Your life will be spent serving people who consider you fundamentally inferior, and your children will inherit the same fate because the medieval social system is designed to be eternal and unchanging, maintaining privilege for the few through the systematic oppression of the many. The final bell tolls not just for the end of another brutal day, but for the grim recognition that this cycle of suffering will continue until your body finally surrenders to the accumulated damage of medieval servitude. You've reached the end of your journey through the daily horrors of castle life, and the view from here isn't inspiring, it's a landscape of permanent exhaustion, broken dreams, and the kind of hopelessness that settles into your bones like winter cold that never leaves. This is your future. Endless repetition of back-breaking labor, punctuated by moments of terror when nobles need entertainment, until death provides the only escape from a life that was never really yours to live. The statistical reality of servant life expectancy reads like a horror story written by someone with a mathematics degree and a cruel sense of humor. Most serfs die before reaching 30, their bodies worn out by labor that would challenge modern athletes while subsisting on nutrition that barely sustains life. The lucky ones die quickly from accidents or acute illnesses. The unlucky ones experience slow deterioration that turns the human body into a catalog of medieval medicine's failures and feudalism's cruelties. Your hands, once capable of delicate work and gentle touch, have become gnarled instruments shaped by years of handling caustic soap, rough tools, and materials that prioritize function over human comfort. The permanent staining from lye, the scars from kitchen accidents, and the deformation from repetitive labor mark you as clearly as any social badge. advertising your servile status to anyone who bothers to look at the human cost of medieval comfort. The respiratory damage from years of inhaling wood smoke, kitchen vapors, and the various toxic substances that medieval people use for cleaning creates a persistent cough that never quite goes away. Your lungs, designed to process clean air, have adapted to an environment where breathing is a constant battle against particles, chemicals, and the accumulated airborne waste of castle life. Each breath reminds you that your body is slowly breaking down under conditions that treat human health as an acceptable sacrifice for noble convenience. Joint pain has become your constant companion, a reliable friend that wakes you each morning and accompanies you through every task until exhaustion finally overcomes discomfort enough to allow sleep. The repetitive motions of servant work, lifting, carrying, scrubbing, bending have worn away cartilage and damaged joints in ways that create chronic pain modern medicine could address, but medieval understanding simply accepts as inevitable consequences of a servant's life. The psychological toll of years spent in servitude manifests in ways that are harder to measure but impossible to ignore. The constant vigilance required to avoid punishment, the daily humiliation of being treated as less than human, and the crushing awareness that your circumstances will never improve create a form of mental exhaustion that goes beyond simple tiredness. You've learned to expect disappointment, anticipate violence, and suppress hope because optimism in your circumstances is a luxury that leads to additional suffering. Sleep, when it comes, brings dreams that mock your waking reality with visions of lives you'll never live and freedoms you'll never experience. You dream of choosing your own work, eating food you've prepared for yourself, and speaking to people who see you as an equal rather than a convenient tool. These dreams provide temporary escape from medieval reality while making your actual circumstances seem even more unbearable when consciousness returns. The accumulation of small injuries over years of dangerous work has left you with a collection of scars, each one telling the story of a moment when medieval life reminded you that your safety is less important than completing whatever task needs doing. Burns from kitchen fires, cuts from sharp tools, bruises from heavy lifting, and the general where that comes from working in environments designed by people who never had to use them themselves. Your social relationships exist within the narrow confines allowed to people of your class, creating connections that are genuine but limited by circumstances that prevent the kind of deep friendships that require time, privacy, and shared experiences beyond mutual suffering. Fellow servants understand your struggles because they share them, but the constant pressure of survival leaves little energy for the emotional connections that make life meaningful. The food that sustains your existence provides calories and basic nutrition while offering no pleasure, variety, or satisfaction beyond the relief of temporary hunger. You've forgotten what it feels like to eat because you want to rather than because you must, to taste flavors chosen for enjoyment rather than availability, or to share meals that celebrate life rather than simply maintaining it. Food has become fuel, and you've become a machine that converts basic nutrition into labor for people who dine on delicacies you'll never taste. Historians still argue whether medieval serfs found happiness within their circumstances, but from your position as someone living those circumstances, the question seems academic. Moments of contentment exist, brief interludes when the work isn't crushing, when fellow servants share something that resembles humor, when the weather cooperates enough to make outdoor tasks bearable. But happiness, real happiness, requires choices and possibilities that your social position simply doesn't allow. The children you might have will inherit your servile status along with the physical and psychological damage that comes from generations of people who've never had control over their own lives. They'll be born into the same cycle of labor and suffering that's defined your existence, with no realistic hope of advancement or escape. The medieval social system ensures that servitude is hereditary, creating permanent classes of people whose circumstances are determined by birth rather than ability or effort. Your literacy remains non-existent not through lack of intelligence but through systematic denial of educational opportunities that might provide tools for understanding or changing your circumstances. The knowledge that might offer hope for improvement is carefully guarded by classes who understand that ignorance is essential for maintaining social control. You'll die as unlettered as you were born, with wisdom gained through suffering rather than learning. The religious instruction you receive emphasizes acceptance of earthly suffering as preparation for heavenly reward, creating a spiritual framework that justifies your misery while providing comfort that's always deferred to an afterlife you can't verify. Religion offers solace for present pain while reinforcing the social system that creates that pain, making spiritual comfort complicit in temporal oppression. Medical care, when you need it, consists of folk remedies that may help, might harm, or could kill you faster than whatever condition requires treatment. Your body will accumulate damage that modern medicine could easily address, but medieval understanding either ignores or makes worse through interventions that demonstrate good intentions and terrible knowledge. You'll die of conditions that future generations will consider easily preventable. The seasonal cycles that once marked natural rhythms now represent predictable patterns of varying types of suffering: winter's cold and hunger, spring's flooding and disease, summer's heat and overwork, autumn's frantic preparation for the cycle to begin again. Time moves in circles rather than lines, bringing repetition rather than progress, familiar misery rather than new possibilities. Personal possessions beyond basic clothing and essential tools remain fantasies that serve mainly to remind you of everything you'll never own, places you'll never visit, and experiences you'll never have. Your material legacy will consist of worn clothing, damaged tools, and perhaps a few coins saved through sacrifices that made your already difficult life even harder. The castle walls that provide protection from external enemies also serve as barriers that separate you from a wider world full of possibilities you'll never explore. Travel requires permission you'll never receive, resources you'll never accumulate, and freedoms that aren't available to people of your social class. The medieval world is vast and varied, but all of it remains beyond your reach. Political events that shape the broader world wars, treaties, dynastic changes affect your life mainly through their impact on your lord's demands for labor, taxes, and military service. History happens around you rather than through you, with great events creating consequences you'll experience but decisions you'll never influence. Your role in the medieval world is to provide the labor that allows others to make history while you survive it. Remember that dawn summons that started this journey through medieval servant life? Well, tomorrow it will ring again, and you'll rise to begin another day identical to this one and every day before it. The bells that mark time in castle life don't signal progress or change, they announce the eternal repetition of tasks that maintain a social system designed to extract value from your existence, while providing you with just enough sustenance to continue working. The great irony of your life is that your labor creates the wealth, comfort, and leisure that allow nobles to consider themselves superior beings deserving of luxury purchased through your suffering. Without your work, their entire way of life would collapse within days. Yet the social system treats you as the expendable element in an arrangement where you're actually essential. Your value is simultaneously crucial and worthless, depending on whether we're measuring economic contribution or social recognition. The final accounting of a servant's life reveals the brutal mathematics of medieval existence. Decades of backbreaking labor exchanged for basic survival. Years of potential sacrifice to maintain social arrangements that benefit everyone except you. And human dignity traded for the minimal security that comes from being useful to people who consider you barely human. It's an equation that doesn't balance, a contract that's fundamentally unfair, and a system that survives through force rather than justice. As your body begins its final decline, whether through accumulated injuries, chronic illness, or simple exhaustion, you'll face death as you've faced life. With resignation rather than acceptance, endurance rather than hope, and the knowledge that your suffering has served purposes you never chose and benefited people who never acknowledged your humanity. Death, when it comes, will be less a tragedy than a release from circumstances that were tragic from the moment of your birth. Your grave, if you're fortunate enough to have one marked, will be forgotten within a generation. Your name lost to history along with those of millions of other people who lived and died in service to a social system that treated human beings as renewable resources. The world will continue without you exactly as it continued despite you, with other servants taking your place in the endless cycle of labor that keeps castles functioning and nobles comfortable. The wind whispers through castle corridors tonight, carrying the sounds of servants beginning another shift, nobles retiring to comfortable chambers, and the eternal machinery of medieval life grinding forward through the accumulated suffering of people whose names will never be remembered. Your story ends here, but the system that created your misery continues, fed by new generations of people born into circumstances they didn't choose and can't escape. Sleep now, if you can, knowing that tomorrow will bring more of the same, and the day after that, and every day until your body finally admits defeat in its battle against circumstances designed to break human beings for the convenience of people who were born lucky enough to never understand what breaking feels like. The bells will ring again at dawn, but perhaps tonight you can find a few hours of peace in dreams that take you somewhere else, to lives where people choose their own work, eat their own food, and sleep in beds they own rather than borrowed straw that smells of other people's exhaustion. Sweet dreams, if medieval servants are allowed such luxuries. Tomorrow the bells will ring again, and the cycle will continue, but tonight, just for tonight, let yourself imagine what it might feel like to wake up free.